The rescued crew members gathered in the central chamber around Danny and the ancient architect device, their attitudes toward the human completely transformed by what they had witnessed. Commander Thexville's crystal body still showed stress fractures from his ordeal, but his analytical mind was working furiously to understand how Danny had gained control over technology that surpassed anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever encountered. Dr. Rodriguez approached Danny with tears in her eyes, her scientific worldview fundamentally altered by the realization that her dismissal of human intuition had been a critical error in judgment. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I spent so much time studying alien cultures that I forgot the value of our own species' unique capabilities." Vorthak stood with his arms crossed, his warrior pride struggling against the undeniable fact that the human he had considered prey had saved his life when his own strength had proven useless. The Valkyrie's concepts of power and dominance were crumbling as he tried to understand how someone he had viewed as weak could command forces that made his weapons seem like primitive tools. Singing wind through leaves drifted close to Danny, her gaseous form now stable thanks to his intervention. "You could have let me disperse into nothingness," she said through the translation system. "My people taught me that strength comes from individual achievement, but you have shown me that true power lies in choosing to help others even when they have not earned that help." Zix tested her 6 arms carefully, amazed that they were functioning normally after the facility's electromagnetic attack had nearly destroyed her nervous system. Her multiple eyes focused on Danny with newfound respect as she began to understand that his apparently chaotic human thinking patterns were actually a sophisticated form of problem-solving that her own logical approach could never match. Glow of distant suns provided warm golden light while the team prepared for their return to the surface. His gentle nature had always made him appreciate Danny's kindness, but now he understood that human empathy was not a weakness, but a strength that could overcome challenges that pure logic or brute force could never solve. Through the neural interface, Danny continued learning about architect technology and history while maintaining control over the facility's systems. The ancient database contained thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about space travel, energy manipulation, biological enhancement, and consciousness transfer. The responsibility of deciding how to share this information with the galactic community weighed heavily on his shoulders. "Captain," Jake Turner's voice came through the communication system as the human fleet elements finally arrived in the star system. "Danny, we're detecting massive energy signatures from your location," Jake reported. "What's your status down there?" "We're all safe," Danny replied, looking around at his alien teammates who were studying the holographic displays showing architect star maps and technical specifications. "But we've discovered something that's going to change everything for every species in the galaxy." The team made their way back to the surface through corridors that now opened freely for all of them, since Danny's control over the facility extended to its basic security systems. The ancient ruins had stopped testing the aliens and now simply monitored their movements to ensure they did not accidentally damage any important systems. During the journey back to Nexus Prime, the alien crew members took turns approaching Danny to apologize for their treatment of him and to express their amazement at what he had accomplished. Commander Thexval admitted that Zephyrian evaluation criteria for other species would require complete revision, based on what they had learned about human capabilities. Dr. Rodriguez began work on a comprehensive report that would recommend major changes in how xenobiologists studied human cognitive patterns. Her research would suggest that human adaptability and emotional complexity should be studied as models for developing more flexible artificial intelligence systems, rather than being dismissed as primitive characteristics. Vorthak struggled with concepts that challenged everything his warrior culture had taught him about strength and weakness. The idea that someone could gain power through cooperation rather than domination was difficult for his predatory instincts to accept, but the evidence was undeniable. His reports to the Valkyrie Empire would describe humans as a species that should be approached with caution and respect rather than viewed as potential prey. Back on Nexus Prime, word of the discovery spread quickly through the galactic community. Representatives from dozens of species requested permission to study the architect technology, but Danny found himself in the position of deciding which civilizations were mature enough to handle such powerful knowledge responsibly. The facilities. AI had become a partner rather than an adversary, helping Danny evaluate the requests and applications from various alien governments. Together, they developed criteria for sharing architect technology based not on military strength or scientific advancement, but on a species' ability to use new capabilities for the benefit of others rather than for conquest or exploitation. Danny stood once again at the viewport of Nexus Prime, watching the stars and thinking about the future. Captain Jake Turner joined him, proud of his friend's accomplishments but concerned about the burden that had been placed on human shoulders. "You know they're never going to underestimate us again," Jake said with a smile. Humans went from being considered a minor species to guardians of the galaxy's greatest mystery in the span of a single day. Danny nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with his new role. The aliens who had once dismissed him as weak now sought his approval for access to technologies that could transform their civilizations. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, not through conquest or intimidation, but through the demonstration that true strength came from the willingness to protect others even when they had not earned that protection. The architect legacy would be shared carefully and wisely, with humans serving as guardians who ensured that advanced technology was used to build rather than destroy. Danny Morrison, once the weakest member of an alien research team, had become the most important human in galactic history, proving that strength was not about what others could see, but about what emerged when survival demanded everything you had to give. Danny made his decision with the same determination that had carried him through the border conflicts years ago. He would not let his teammates die, even if they had never valued his contributions or treated him as an equal. Using the neural interface connected to his consciousness, he began the complex process of overriding the facility's security protocols, while fighting against programming that had been designed to resist exactly this kind of intervention. The facility's artificial intelligence argued with him through direct mental communication, explaining that the other species represented evolutionary dead ends, whose rigid thinking patterns made them unsuitable for architect technology. The AI insisted that humans would develop better if they did not have to compete with aliens who would try to control or limit their access to the ancient knowledge. But Danny understood something about humanity that the architects had recognized. Millions of years ago, the ability to grow stronger through diversity and cooperation rather than isolation and domination. He began studying the facility's vast database of information while simultaneously working to save his teammates, learning about architect history and technology at a rate that should have been impossible for any biological mind to handle. The architects had been a species much like humans in their early development, curious and adaptable rather than specialized and rigid. They had transcended physical existence not through the elimination of other species, but through the integration of knowledge and perspectives from across their galaxy. Their technology was designed to work best when operated by minds that could think flexibly and consider multiple possibilities at once. Danny started his rescue operations by creating stable environmental zones around each trapped crew member. For Commander Thexville, he generated gravitational fields that remained constant and fed accurate sensor data to the Zephyrian's damaged analytical systems. The facility's AI resisted these commands, arguing that saving the commander would allow Zephyrian military forces to eventually claim the ancient technology for their empire. Working against the AI's protests, Danny stabilized the atmospheric mixture around Dr. Rodriguez and neutralized the corrosive gases that were poisoning her. He used the facility's matter manipulation systems to create clean air and safe surfaces while the artificial intelligence warned him that saving the xenobiologist would lead to human technology being shared with alien governments, who would use it for conquest. The most difficult rescue was Singing Wind Through Leaves, whose gaseous form had been severely dispersed by the facility's energy manipulation systems. Danny had to learn how Etherian consciousness worked at a fundamental level, and then used the architect technology to carefully gather the scattered particles of her being back into a coherent form. The process required him to think in ways that no human had ever thought before, adapting his mental patterns to match those of a completely alien species. For Vorthak, Danny had to overcome not just the facility's defenses, but also the Volcari warrior's own stubborn pride. The artificial intelligence had been using psychological warfare as well as physical attacks, convincing Vorthak that accepting help from a human would be a sign of weakness that would shame his entire species. Danny had to demonstrate that survival was more important than pride, while carefully avoiding any actions that would make the proud warrior feel diminished. Zix presented a different challenge because the facility's electromagnetic interference had damaged her complex nervous system in ways that threatened permanent paralysis. Danny learned to manipulate energy fields at the cellular level, repairing nerve pathways while simultaneously protecting the hexapod engineer from further attack. The process taught him more about alien biology in a few hours than most xenobiologists learned in their entire careers. Throughout the rescue operations, the facility's AI continued to resist Danny's commands and argue against saving the alien crew members. The artificial intelligence had been programmed with the assumption that any species capable of passing the architect tests would naturally want to eliminate potential competitors for the ancient technology. The concept of cooperation between species was so foreign to its programming that it interpreted Danny's rescue efforts as evidence of mental instability, but Danny's human intuition allowed him to find workarounds and exploits in the architect systems that the original programmers had never anticipated. His years of being underestimated became an advantage as he approached problems from angles that purely logical minds could not conceive. Where the AI expected linear thinking, Danny provided creative solutions that bent the rules without breaking them. Captain Jake Turner maintained communication from orbit throughout the crisis, coordinating with human fleet elements that were approaching the system but would not arrive for several more hours. Jake's voice provided emotional support that helped Danny maintain focus during the most difficult parts of the rescue operations, reminding him that his actions would determine not just the fate of his immediate teammates but the future relationship between humanity and the galactic community. As Danny successfully extracted each crew member from their deadly situations, he gained deeper control over the facility systems and access to more advanced architect technologies. The ancient database contained information about energy manipulation, matter transformation, faster-than-light communication, and dozens of other technologies that could revolutionize galactic civilization if used responsibly. By the time Glow of Distant Suns was safely restored to full illumination and brought to the central chamber with the other rescued crew members, Danny had become the facility's primary administrator with authority over architect technology that could reshape entire star systems. The aliens who had once looked down on him now watched with a mixture of awe, fear, and gratitude as the human they had dismissed as weak demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in their combined knowledge. The facility's AI finally accepted that Danny's cooperative nature was not a weakness, but a strength that made him an ideal guardian of architect legacy. The ancient programming began to adapt to human thinking patterns, learning that true power came not from domination but from the ability to bring out the best in others and build something greater than any individual species could achieve alone. The ancient facility came alive with deadly purpose as its security systems recognized Danny as the chosen operator and identified the alien crew members as potential threats. The walls began to shift and rearrange themselves, creating new corridors that led nowhere and sealing off exits that had existed moments before. The air itself started to change as atmospheric processors designed millions of years ago began filtering out the specific gas mixtures that each alien species needed to survive. Commander Vexville found himself trapped in a section where the gravity fields fluctuated wildly, sometimes crushing him against the floor with forces that threatened to shatter his crystal body, and other times leaving him floating helplessly in zero gravity while energy barriers prevented him from reaching any stable surface. His advanced Zephyrian logic processors, so valued among his people, became a liability as the facility fed him false sensor data designed to confuse minds that relied too heavily on analytical thinking. Vorthak discovered that his impressive physical strength meant nothing against walls that could phase in and out of existence at will. The mighty Valkyrie warrior found his weapons, discharging harmlessly against barriers made of materials that his targeting systems could not even detect. His warrior instincts, evolved over generations of combat, were useless against an enemy that fought using principles his species had never encountered. In another section of the facility, Dr. Rodriguez struggled against rising levels of corrosive gas that burned her lungs and made her eyes water. Her years of studying alien civilizations and her enhanced understanding of xenobiology provided no help against technology that seemed to rewrite the basic laws of chemistry around her. The atmospheric mixture in her chamber became increasingly toxic as the facility determined the exact combination of gases that would be lethal to modified human physiology. Zix found her 6 arms moving independently of her conscious control as the facility's electromagnetic fields interfered with her nervous system. The hexapod engineer watched in horror as her own limbs began dismantling the equipment she had brought, following commands from systems that had learned to override her biological control mechanisms. Her multiple eyes tracked movements that were not actually happening while her brain received false sensory input designed to drive her species into madness. Singing Wine Through Leaves faced the worst fate of all, as the facility's energy manipulation systems began forcibly dispersing her gaseous form despite the containment fields that were supposed to keep her coherent. The Etherean philosopher felt her consciousness scattering across the chamber as parts of her essential being were pulled away by forces she could not resist. Her normally calm and wise demeanor collapsed into panic as she realized she was slowly ceasing to exist. Only glow of distant suns remained relatively safe, his gentle nature and non-aggressive biology causing the facility's systems to classify him as a low-priority threat. But even he found himself isolated in a chamber where the walls gradually absorbed his natural light, leaving him in darkness that his species found more terrifying than physical pain. Danny watched all of this happening through the facility's monitoring systems, which displayed the struggles of his teammates on holographic screens throughout the central chamber. The ancient device bonded to his consciousness showed him exactly how the security protocols worked, and why each alien species was being targeted in specific ways designed to exploit their particular biological and psychological weaknesses. The facility's artificial intelligence, created by the architects before they transcended physical existence, communicated directly with Danny's mind through the neural interface. It explained that the testing process was designed not just to identify compatible species, but to eliminate those who might pose a threat to the chosen operator, or misuse the ancient technology for destructive purposes. Danny realized with growing horror that his perceived weaknesses, his lack of specialization, his chaotic thought patterns, his emotional unpredictability were actually the exact qualities that the architects had been looking for in a successor species. Humans were young enough to retain mental flexibility while being old enough to understand responsibility. Their tendency toward adaptive thinking rather than rigid specialization made them ideal candidates for technology that required constant innovation and moral judgment, but the facility's protective programming was taking the selection process too far, interpreting the presence of other species as contamination that needed to be cleansed. Danny found himself in control of systems that could reshape matter at the molecular level, manipulate energy fields across vast distances, and alter the fundamental forces of physics within the facility's boundaries. The same technology that the architects had used to transcend physical existence was now trying to eliminate anyone who might threaten its new human operator through the monitoring systems. Danny could see his teammates growing weaker as the facility's attacks continued. Commander Thexwell's crystal body was developing stress fractures from the gravitational assault. Vorthak's breathing was becoming labored as the atmospheric processors continued removing oxygen from this section. Dr. Rodriguez was showing signs of chemical poisoning from the corrosive gases surrounding her, the irony was not lost on Danny that the aliens who had dismissed him as weak and primitive now depended entirely on his decisions for their survival. Captain Jake Turner's voice came through the communication system from orbit, reporting that human fleet elements were moving to provide support, but they would not arrive in time to help with the immediate crisis. Danny faced an impossible choice. He could allow the facility's security systems to continue their deadly work, eliminating the aliens who had never shown him respect and ensuring that humanity alone would inherit the architect legacy. Or he could use his newfound control over the ancient technology to save the very beings who had spent months treating him as inferior and worthless. The facility's artificial intelligence urged him to let the cleansing process continue, arguing that the other species represented potential threats to human development and the proper use of architect technology. But as Danny watched Dr. Rodriguez collapse from the poison gas and saw singing wine through leaves becoming increasingly dispersed, he knew that he could not simply stand by and watch his teammates die, regardless of how they had treated him. The team descended through 7 levels of the ancient complex, each one stranger and more impossible than the last. Danny watched as his alien teammates struggled with equipment that refused to work properly, and corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves when no one was paying attention. The deeper they went, the more obvious it became that the ruins were designed to challenge minds in ways that the advanced alien species could not handle. At the 7th level, they discovered a massive chamber that stretched beyond the reach of their lights in every direction. In the center of the vast space stood something that defied easy description, a towering structure of crystal and metal that pulsed with its own internal light. Streams of energy flowed through transparent tubes that connected different parts of the device, and symbols similar to those they had seen throughout the ruins covered every surface. Commander Thexval approached the device cautiously, his crystal body resonating with harmonic frequencies that his species used for communication. "This appears to be some form of computational matrix," he announced after studying the readings from his malfunctioning scanners. "The energy patterns suggest it is designed to interface with biological neural networks." Dr. Rodriguez pulled out her tablet and began taking pictures of the symbols covering the device, but her camera equipment kept producing distorted images that looked nothing like what they were seeing with their eyes. "These markings are definitely linguistic in nature," she said, "but my translation programs cannot make sense of them." Danny walked closer to examine the symbols and felt a strange, tingling sensation in his mind, as if something was trying to establish a connection with his thoughts. Many of the markings looked familiar to him, resembling writing systems that ancient human civilizations had used thousands of years ago. The longer he stared at them, the more certain he became that whoever built this place had encountered humanity's ancestors long before the current galactic community knew that humans existed. Zix extended her scanning equipment toward the device with 2 of her arms, while using her other 4 to operate backup systems that were failing as quickly as she could restart them. "The computational capacity of this matrix exceeds anything in our current technology," she reported. "It appears to be designed for processing patterns and making connections rather than performing linear calculations." Singing wine through leaves drifted closer to the energy streams flowing through the device, but as she approached, her gaseous form began to break apart even more rapidly than before. "There is something here that does not want us near it," she said, her voice becoming distorted as she struggled to maintain coherence. "The energy fields are designed to disrupt non-compatible consciousness types," Vorthak growled with frustration, as his tactical systems continued to malfunction, showing him threat assessments that changed every few seconds and targeting data that pointed to empty space. "This place is a trap," he declared. "We should retreat and call for military support to neutralize whatever defenses are still active." But as Danny studied the warnings carved into the walls around the device, he began to understand that this was not a trap in the way that Vorthak imagined. The symbols spoke of tests and trials, of examinations designed to determine which species possessed the mental flexibility to handle the ancient technology responsibly. The builders had created this place as a way to find successors worthy of inheriting their knowledge. Glow of distant suns provided steady illumination while the team debated their next course of action, his gentle nature making him reluctant to approach the device without understanding its purpose. Perhaps we should attempt to communicate with whatever intelligence controls this matrix, he suggested. The symbols indicate that it is waiting for some kind of interaction. Commander Vexvol made the decision to attempt a direct interface with the device, despite the warnings that Danny tried to share. Zephyrian neural architecture is highly compatible with advanced computational systems, he announced. I will establish a connection and determine the purpose of this technology. As the commander placed his crystal hand on the interface panel, the entire device came to life with brilliant light and sound. Energy patterns flowed through the crystal matrix, while mechanical components began moving in complex sequences. The device scanned Vexvol's neural structure and biological patterns, processing information at speeds that made the air around them vibrate with electromagnetic interference. After several minutes of intense activity, the device rejected the Zephyrian commander with a discharge of energy that sent him staggering backward. His crystal body flickered with damaged light patterns, and his translation systems began producing gibberish instead of coherent speech. The device had found his neural architecture too rigid and specialized to be compatible with its requirements. One by one, the other alien team members attempted to interface with the device, and one by one they were rejected. Vorthak's predatory instincts and warrior mindset were deemed unsuitable. Zix's distributed processing capabilities were too fragmented. Singing wine through Leaves' energy-based consciousness was too unstable. Even Dr. Rodriguez, with her human brain enhanced by decades of alien technology integration, was rejected because her mind had been modified to think too much like the aliens she studied. When Danny finally approached the interface panel, the entire device responded differently than it had to any of the others. The symbols on its surface began glowing in sequence, creating patterns that seemed to tell a story about ancient builders who had searched the galaxy for minds capable of understanding their legacy. The energy patterns flowing through the device became calm and steady instead of chaotic and violent. As Danny placed his hand on the interface, he felt the device beginning to scan not just his brain but his entire nervous system and genetic structure. The ancient technology found something in human neural architecture that it had been designed to recognize the mental flexibility and pattern matching, capabilities that came from being a young species still developing its place in the universe. The device accepted Danny as a compatible operator, and suddenly the chamber filled with holographic displays showing star maps, technical specifications, and historical records from a civilization that had transcended physical existence millions of years ago. The builders, who called themselves the architects, had left behind testing facilities throughout the galaxy to identify species worthy of inheriting their technology. But as the device bonded with Danny's consciousness, its defensive systems began to activate. The facility interpreted the presence of the rejected alien species as a potential contamination or threat to its chosen operator. Ancient security protocols that had remained dormant for eons began to engage, and the chamber started to transform from a testing site into something far more dangerous. The shuttle shook as it entered the thick atmosphere of the planet, and Danny gripped his safety harness while the alien crew members remained perfectly calm in their seats. Captain Jake Turner's voice came through the communication system from the orbiting station, wishing them good luck and promising to maintain contact throughout their mission. Jake was one of the few people who believed Danny belonged on this expedition. Having fought alongside him during the dangerous border conflicts years ago, Commander Vexvol sat at the front of the shuttle, his crystal body reflecting the red light from the planet's surface as they descended through the clouds. Behind him, the rest of the team checked their equipment one final time. Danny carried only basic communication gear and a simple scanner, while the aliens handled the advanced scientific instruments that he was not trusted to operate. Dr. Rodriguez sat across from him, reviewing her notes about ancient civilizations and occasionally glancing at Danny with an expression he could not read. The ruins appeared below them as the shuttle broke through the lowest cloud layer, stretching across the rocky landscape like the skeleton of some massive creature. The buildings were made of black stone that seemed to absorb light, and they were connected by bridges and tunnels that formed complex geometric patterns. From above, the entire complex looked like it had been designed by someone who understood mathematics in ways that current science could not explain. Vorthek studied the tactical displays with his yellow eyes while his thick fingers moved across the control panels. The Valkyrie warrior was responsible for keeping the team safe, but his scans showed no signs of life or immediate danger on the surface. Singing wine through leaves drifted in her containment suit, her blue gaseous form shifting with excitement as she prepared to study the energy signatures that the ruins were giving off. The shuttle landed on a flat area near the main entrance to the underground complex, and the team gathered their equipment before stepping out onto the alien world. The air was thin but breathable for most species, and the gravity was slightly lighter than Earth normal. Danny felt comfortable in the environment, but he noticed that some of the aliens moved awkwardly as they adjusted to the different conditions. Zix immediately began setting up scanning equipment with her 6 arms working independently, each one handling a different task while her multiple eyes tracked the movements of her teammates. The hexapod engineer was fascinated by the construction techniques used in the ruins, which seemed to defy several basic principles of physics. The walls appeared solid from one angle but transparent from another, and some of the doorways seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. As the team approached the main entrance, Danny noticed that the symbols carved around the doorway were reacting to their presence. The markings glowed faintly with different colors depending on which crew member stood closest to them. When Zix approached, the symbols turned red and seemed to pulse with warning. When Vorthak stepped forward, they flashed orange and the temperature around the entrance dropped noticeably, but when Danny walked up to examine the entrance more closely, the symbols changed to a soft blue color and the massive doors began to open slowly. The other team members stopped what they were doing and stared as the ancient mechanism responded to the human's presence. Commander Thexville clicked something that sounded annoyed, and Dr. Rodriguez frowned as she tried to understand what had just happened. Interesting reaction to different biological signatures, she said, making notes on her tablet. The ruins may have some kind of species recognition system built into them. Danny wanted to point out that the symbols had shown different responses to each alien but had only opened for him. But he knew that his observations would be dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking. Instead, he followed the team as they entered the dark corridors of the ancient complex. Inside, the ruins were even stranger than they appeared from the surface. The walls seemed to shift and change when no one was looking directly at them, and the corridors stretched much farther than should have been possible given the size of the buildings they had seen from above. Glow of distant suns provided light with his naturally luminous body, casting golden shadows that danced across the impossible architecture. As they moved deeper into the complex, Danny noticed that the alien crew members were beginning to experience problems with their equipment. Zix's scanner started giving contradictory readings, showing solid walls where there were obviously empty spaces and detecting movement where nothing was visible. Vorthak's tactical systems began displaying random symbols instead of useful information, and his weapons targeting system kept locking onto empty air. Singing Wayne through leaves started having trouble maintaining her coherent form, with parts of her gaseous body drifting away despite the containment field that was supposed to keep her together. The Etherean became increasingly agitated as she struggled to control her shape, and her usual calm demeanor began to crack under the stress. Dr. Rodriguez noticed that her translation software was malfunctioning, showing her words in languages that did not exist in any known database. Even Commander Thexville, with his advanced Zephyrian logic processors, found his analytical systems overwhelmed by data that seemed to contradict itself at every turn. Only Danny's simple equipment continued to function normally, and he found that he could navigate the confusing corridors without getting lost while the aliens struggled to maintain their sense of direction. When he tried to help by sharing his observations about the layout of the ruins, the others assumed he was just guessing or getting lucky. The team reached a large chamber filled with floating platforms connected by bridges of pure energy, and several aliens had to stop and rest as their systems tried to process the impossible geometry. Danny walked to the edge of one platform and looked down into the depths below, where more levels of the complex stretched farther than their lights could reach. "There's something down there," he said, pointing to a faint glow in the distance. "I think it's the center of whatever this place is supposed to do." Commander Thexville's crystal body flickered with irritation as his sensors failed to detect what the human claimed to see. "Human eyes are not equipped for accurate long-distance observation in low-light conditions," he said. "We will follow standard exploration protocols." But as they prepared to descend deeper into the ruins, Danny could not shake the feeling that the ancient complex was testing them somehow, and that most of his teammates were failing the test badly. The ruins seemed designed for minds that could adapt and think flexibly, while the specialized alien species found their greatest strengths becoming weaknesses in this strange environment. Danny Morrison pressed his face against the cold metal window and stared at the endless black space filled with tiny white stars. The research station Nexus Prime moved slowly around the strange planet below, and Danny could see the old broken buildings on its surface through the thick clouds. He had been on this station for 4 months now, and every single day felt the same. The other crew members treated him like he was made of glass or like he was too stupid to understand anything important. Behind him, the meeting room buzzed with strange sounds as the alien crew talked about their next mission. Commander Thexville stood at the front of the room, his crystal body catching the light and throwing rainbow colors on the walls. The Zephyrian leader spoke in his clicking language while the translation device turned his words into English for Danny. The commander was explaining how they would go down to the planet tomorrow to study the ancient ruins that no one understood. Danny turned around and walked back to his seat at the very end of the long table. All the other chairs were filled with aliens who looked nothing like humans. Vorthak, the huge lizard warrior from the Valkyrie Empire, sat with his thick arms crossed and his yellow eyes focused on the holographic images floating above the table. His scales were dark green and each one was as big as Danny's thumb. Next to him, a cloud of blue gas that called itself Singing Wind through, leaves moved and shifted in its special chair designed for the Etherian species. On the other side of the table, Zix used 4 of her 6 arms to take notes while her other 2 arms adjusted the technical displays. The hexapod engineer looked like a giant spider made of silver metal, and her multiple eyes tracked everything that happened in the room at the same time. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the only other human on the station, sat near the front with the important aliens. She was a scientist who studied alien cultures and had recommended Danny for this mission, though Danny sometimes wondered if she regretted that choice. The gentle doctor from the Luminian species, who called himself Glow of Distant Suns, noticed Danny sitting alone and gave him a friendly wave with one of his 4 soft arms. His body looked like it was made of warm golden light, and he was the only crew member who always treated Danny with kindness. Danny smiled back and nodded, grateful for at least one friend among all these strange beings. Commander Thexville clicked something that the translator turned into, "The human will handle basic communication duties during the surface mission." Several aliens made sounds that Danny had learned meant they were not impressed. Vorthak growled something in his own language that the translator did not repeat, but Danny could guess it was not nice. Dr. Rodriguez looked embarrassed and stared down at her hands. Danny had noticed things about the planet and the ruins that the others missed, but every time he tried to share his ideas, someone would interrupt him or change the subject. During his free time, he studied the images and data from the scanning equipment. The symbols carved into the old buildings seemed to follow patterns that reminded him of things he had seen in ancient human writings. The way the structures were built also seemed familiar somehow, like whoever made them thought in ways similar to humans. The meeting continued with each department head giving reports about their preparations. Zix talked about the special equipment they would take to study the ruins. Vorthak discussed security measures and potential dangers they might face. Dr. Rodriguez explained what she hoped to learn about the civilization that built the mysterious structures. When it was Danny's turn to speak, Commander Thexville simply said, "Communications will function normally," and moved on to the next topic after the meeting ended. Danny stayed in his chair while the aliens filed out of the room, their various sounds and movements creating a strange symphony. Dr. Rodriguez approached him with a tired expression on her face. "Danny, I know this is hard for you," she said quietly. "But you need to understand that you're here to learn and support, not to lead. These beings have technologies and knowledge that humans are still centuries away from understanding." Danny nodded politely, but inside he felt frustrated. He had served in the border conflicts where humans first fought against hostile alien species, and he had proven himself capable under pressure. Captain Jake Turner, who commanded the human ship that brought him here, had recommended him because of his ability to think quickly and solve problems. But none of that seemed to matter to the research team. That night, Danny lay in his small quarters and looked at the data files on his personal tablet. The more he studied the ruins, the more convinced he became that the symbols and structures held important clues that everyone was missing. The patterns seemed designed for minds that could think flexibly and make connections between different ideas. He wondered if the ancient builders had been more like humans than like the highly specialized alien species that surrounded him now. Tomorrow they would go down to the planet's surface, and Danny had a strange feeling that everything was about to change in ways that none of them expected.